In just 39 seconds, one of Hollywood's biggest stars went from polite conversation to a full-blown screaming match with his host, ending with George Clooney storming off set in what witnesses are calling the most explosive talk show meltdown in years. What started as a simple discussion about celebrity activism turned into a vicious battle that exposed Bill Maher's worst instincts on live television. Before we dive into this insane story, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We upload daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the moments that reveal who these celebrities really are behind the cameras. Last night's episode of Real Time was supposed to be another celebrity appearance, another chance for Bill Maher to show off his wit and intelligence. George Clooney was there to talk about his latest film and some humanitarian work he'd been doing overseas. The studio audience was packed, the cameras were rolling, and everything seemed normal as Clooney walked out to applause and took his seat across from Maher. The first few minutes went exactly as expected. Maher cracked some jokes about Clooney's famous friends, made a comment about his wife Amal being smarter than him, the usual late-night banter that audiences eat up. Clooney laughed along, told a funny story about being on set, and seemed relaxed in the chair. The audience was loving it. Everything felt smooth. Then Maher brought up Clooney's recent trip to Sudan, where he'd been documenting human rights violations and meeting with refugees. It seemed like a natural transition in the conversation, the kind of serious topic that Maher often pivots to after the jokes die down. Clooney's face changed immediately, becoming more focused and passionate as he started describing what he'd witnessed overseas. "I met children who haven't eaten in days, Bill," Clooney said, leaning forward in his chair. "Families torn apart by violence that the world isn't paying attention to. And I'm trying to use whatever platform I have to shine a light on it." Maher nodded, but there was something in his expression that suggested he wasn't entirely on board with where this was going. He had that look he gets sometimes, that smirk that says he's about to play devil's advocate whether anyone asked him to or not. Right, Maher said, interrupting Clooney mid-sentence. "But here's what I don't understand about you Hollywood activists. You fly in on your private jets, you take some photos with poor people, you make everyone feel bad for 20 minutes, and then you fly home to your mansion. What does that actually accomplish?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension immediately. Clooney's smile faded, and he sat back in his chair, clearly not expecting Maher to go there so quickly. "That's a pretty cynical take," Clooney responded, his voice steady but with an edge to it. "I've been working on these issues for over 15 years. I've testified before Congress, I've helped fund organizations on the ground, doing real work. It's not just photo ops." Maher waved his hand dismissively, and this is where people in the audience said they knew things were about to go sideways. "Come on, George. You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If you really cared, you'd sell one of your houses and feed an entire village for a year. Instead, you show up, you get your publicity, and then it's back to Lake Como." Clooney's jaw tightened. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about." "I know that celebrity activism is mostly performative nonsense," Maher shot back, getting more animated. "It makes you feel good. It makes you look good, but it doesn't actually change anything. You want to know what would help those people? Real political change, not George Clooney taking selfies with refugees." The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. This wasn't the fun, edgy political commentary they'd signed up for. This was starting to feel mean-spirited and personal. Clooney took a deep breath, and you could see him trying to maintain his composure. "Bill, I've dedicated a significant portion of my life and my resources to these causes. I don't do it for publicity. I do it because I've seen suffering that you can't imagine, and I have the means to help. If that makes me a hypocrite in your eyes, then fine. But at least I'm doing something instead of sitting in a studio making jokes about people who give a damn." Ooh, that landed. Maher's face changed completely. The smirk disappeared and was replaced with something uglier, something defensive and angry. He leaned forward in his chair, pointing his finger at Clooney. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy because I'm not pretending that you flying around the world on private jets while lecturing everyone else about compassion isn't completely ridiculous? Give me a break, George. It's not about private jets, Bill. It's about using whatever influence you have to make a difference. What do you use your influence for? To mock people who actually try? The audience started murmuring. Some people were clearly on Clooney's side now, and you could hear a few people actually saying, "Yeah," and "He's right," from their seats. Maher heard it too, and it only seemed to make him angrier. "My influence?" Maher said, his voice getting louder. "I use my influence to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it pisses people off. That's more than I can say for most of Hollywood, who just want everyone to think they're saints while they count their money." Clooney shook his head, and there was this moment where he looked like he might just get up and leave right there. But instead, he stayed in his chair and locked eyes with Maher. "You know what your problem is, Bill? You think being an asshole is the same thing as being honest. You think if you insult people and tear them down, that somehow makes you brave or truthful. But really, you're just mean. And you hide behind this idea that you're some kind of truth teller when really, you just like making people feel small." The audience gasped, literally gasped. Some people even started clapping. But the applause was scattered and quickly died down because nobody knew if they were allowed to clap during what was clearly becoming a hostile situation. Maher's face turned red. "Oh, I mean? That's rich coming from Hollywood royalty, who's so insulated from reality that you think spending a weekend in Africa makes you Mother Teresa. You want to talk about making people feel small? How do you think actual aid workers feel when you swoop in, take all the credit, and then leave them to do the real work?" "I've never taken credit for other people's work," Clooney said, his voice rising now. "And I've worked alongside aid workers who appreciate the attention these issues get when someone with a platform talks about them. But you wouldn't know anything about that because you're too busy sitting here in your bubble, being edgy for your audience." "My bubble?" Maher laughed, but it was an angry laugh with no humor in it. "That's hilarious. You're calling me out for being in a bubble? You're the one who hangs out exclusively with millionaires and politicians. When's the last time you had a real conversation with a regular person?" "I talk to regular people all the time, Bill. I just don't belittle them on national television for entertainment." The tension in the room was unbearable now. The producers were probably freaking out in the control room, but the cameras kept rolling. This was live television, and there was no way to stop what was happening. Maher stood up from his chair, which was unusual. He never stands up during interviews. "You know what? I'm tired of being lectured by actors who think they're qualified to have opinions on everything just because people pay to watch them pretend to be other people. You're not special, George. You're just famous." Clooney stood up too, matching Maher's energy. "And you're not as smart as you think you are, Bill. You're just rude. There's a difference between being intelligent and being a jerk, and you've never figured out which one you actually are." "Get off my show," Maher said suddenly, his voice cold. The audience went completely silent. Nobody moved. Clooney stared at him for a long moment. "Excuse me? You heard me. Get off my show. If you're going to come on here and insult me, insult my audience, and pretend like you're better than everyone else, then you can leave. I don't need you here." Clooney laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "You're kicking me off because I called you out? That's perfect. That's exactly what someone would do when they know they're wrong but are too stubborn to admit it." "I'm kicking you off because this interview is over," Maher said, crossing his arms. "You want to go save the world? Go do it. Just don't expect me to sit here and applaud while you act like you're saving the world by attending fancy charity galas." The audience was split now. Some people were booing, some were silent, and a few were actually supporting Maher, which made the whole thing even more chaotic. Clooney unclipped his microphone and tossed it onto the chair. "You know what the saddest part of this is, Bill?" Clooney said, his voice quieter now but somehow more intense. "You had a chance to have a real conversation about real issues that affect real people. But instead, you turned it into this. You made it about me, about you, about egos and nonsense. Those kids I met in Sudan, they don't care about any of this. They just want to survive. But you can't even get out of your own way long enough to care about that." Maher didn't respond. He just stood there, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "This is what you do," Clooney continued, gesturing around the studio. "You invite people on. You get them talking about something meaningful. And then you tear them down because it gets you ratings. You don't care about truth. You care about conflict. You care about being the smartest guy in the room, even when you're dead wrong." "Are you done?" Maher asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, I'm done," Clooney said. I'm done trying to have an intelligent conversation with someone who's more interested in scoring points than actually listening. Good luck with your show, Bill. I hope tearing people down keeps working out for you. Maher opened his mouth to respond, but Clooney was already walking off the set. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay quiet, so the reaction was this weird mixture of scattered claps and uncomfortable silence. Maher stood there for a moment, watching Clooney leave, and then turned back to the camera. But before he could say anything, before he could make some joke to diffuse the situation or take one last shot at Clooney, something else happened. A woman in the audience stood up. "That was completely uncalled for," she shouted at Maher. "He was trying to talk about something important, and you just attacked him." Other audience members started joining in, some agreeing with her, some defending Maher. The studio erupted into chaos. People were arguing with each other, yelling across the rows. Maher tried to regain control, holding up his hands and asking everyone to calm down, but it was too late. The show had completely fallen apart. "We're going to take a break," Maher said into the camera, but his voice was shaky. You could tell he wasn't expecting any of this. The confident, snarky host, who always has the perfect comeback, looked genuinely rattled. As the camera cut away, you could still hear the commotion in the studio. People were standing up, some were leaving, others were still shouting. The producers were probably having a meltdown trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. Backstage, according to witnesses who were there, Clooney was furious. Not just angry, but genuinely upset in a way that went beyond the usual celebrity drama. He was talking to his people, pacing back and forth, and at one point someone heard him say, "I've never been treated like that on a talk show in my entire career." And he was right. George Clooney has done hundreds of interviews over the decades. He's been on every major talk show, every late-night program, every morning show. He's been asked tough questions before. He's been challenged on his views, but nothing like what happened with Maher. Because there's a difference between asking hard questions and just being cruel. What Maher did wasn't journalism or smart commentary. It was a personal attack, dressed up as political debate. He took someone who was genuinely trying to discuss humanitarian issues and made it about private jets and mansions and hypocrisy. He reduced real suffering to a punchline, just so he could feel superior. Back in the studio, Maher tried to continue the show after the break. He brought out his panel of guests like nothing had happened, but the energy was completely different. The audience was still tense, still divided. Every joke he made landed flat. Every political point he tried to make was met with scattered, half-hearted reactions. At one point during the panel discussion, one of the other guests, a political commentator, actually brought up what had just happened with Clooney. "Can we talk about what just went down?" she asked. "Because I think that got really uncomfortable." Maher tried to brush it off. "George is a big boy. He can handle a tough interview. If he can't take the heat, maybe he shouldn't come on political talk shows." But the commentator didn't let it go. "Bill, there's a difference between tough questions and just being hostile. You didn't give him a chance to actually discuss his work. You just attacked him." "I challenged him," Maher corrected. "There's a difference." "No, you insulted him." Another panelist chimed in. "Look, I'm all for holding celebrities accountable, but what you did crossed a line. The man is trying to help people, and you made fun of him for it." Maher's face was getting red again. You could see he was getting defensive, probably replaying the argument in his head, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, he'd gone too far. But instead of acknowledging it, instead of showing even a hint of self-reflection, he doubled down. "Listen, if George Clooney or anyone else wants to come on this show and lecture America about how we should care more while they live in luxury, they're going to get challenged. That's what this show is about. I'm not here to kiss celebrity ass." The panel got quiet after that. Nobody wanted to keep arguing with Maher on his own show, but the damage was done. The rest of the episode limped along, awkward and tense, until it finally ended. As the credits rolled, you could still see the discomfort on everyone's faces. Social media exploded immediately. People who had watched the show live started posting clips, sharing their reactions, taking sides. Some defended Maher, saying he was right to call out celebrity hypocrisy and that Clooney was too sensitive. But the majority of people, including a lot of Maher's regular viewers, were on Clooney's side. Bill Maher just kicked George Clooney off his show for trying to talk about humanitarian work. Let that sink in. one popular tweet read. Imagine inviting someone on your show just to bully them for caring about people. Bill Maher is so far up his own ass he can't see daylight, another person posted. Entertainment journalists started writing hot takes within minutes. Some framed it as a debate about the role of celebrity activism. Others called it what it really was: a talk show host having a meltdown because his guest wouldn't play along with his narrative. But the most damning reactions came from people who actually work in humanitarian fields. Aid workers, activists, and people who had worked with Clooney started speaking out, defending his work and slamming Maher for trivializing real issues. George Clooney has helped bring international attention to conflicts that would otherwise be ignored, one humanitarian worker tweeted. Bill Maher spent an hour making fun of him for it. Who's really making a difference? By the time the show ended, it was already clear that this wasn't just another talk show controversy that would blow over. This was different. This had crossed a line that people weren't comfortable with, even people who usually enjoyed Maher's confrontational style. In the studio, after the cameras stopped rolling and the audience had left, Maher apparently sat on the set alone for a while. The crew was cleaning up around him, putting away equipment, but he just sat there in his chair, staring at the empty seat where Clooney had been. One crew member who was there later told a reporter that Maher looked genuinely shaken. "I've worked on this show for years, and I've never seen him like that," the crew member said. "He's usually so confident, so sure of himself. But after that thing with Clooney, he just looked lost." Maybe in that moment, sitting alone in the studio, Maher realized what he'd done. Maybe he understood that he'd let his ego and his need to be the smartest person in the room blind him to basic decency. Or maybe he was just mad that the interview had blown up in his face. Either way, the damage was done. The interview was over, Clooney was gone, and the internet had all the footage it needed to dissect every moment of the confrontation for days, weeks, probably months to come. The thing is, Bill Maher built his entire career on being willing to say what other people won't say, on pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions, making people uncomfortable. And sometimes that's valuable. Sometimes we need someone to ask the hard questions and refuse to accept easy answers. But somewhere along the way, Maher seemed to forget that there's a difference between being brave and being cruel, between challenging ideas and attacking people, between seeking truth and just seeking conflict for its own sake. What happened with George Clooney wasn't brave political commentary. It wasn't speaking truth to power. It was a man who spent so long playing the role of the contrarian that he can't turn it off anymore. He sees someone doing good work, and his instinct isn't to engage with it honestly. It's to tear it down, to find the angle that makes him look smart and them look foolish. And the worst part, Maher probably still thinks he was right. He probably thinks Clooney couldn't handle tough questions. He probably thinks the audience that turned on him just didn't get it, didn't understand his point. Because people like Maher rarely have the self-awareness to realize when they've gone too far. As Clooney walked through the backstage area toward the exit, still fuming from what had just happened, he passed by the green room where other guests were waiting. One of them, another actor who was scheduled to appear on the show next week, stopped him. "Hey man, I just wanted to say I thought you handled that really well," the actor said. Maher was way out of line. Clooney nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thanks. I've been working on these issues for years, and to have someone reduce it all to a joke, to make it seem like I'm doing it for attention, it's infuriating. I know, man, everyone knows. You don't have to justify yourself." Clooney smiled. A real smile for the first time since the interview had gone south. "I appreciate that." As he continued toward the exit, Clooney's phone was already blowing up with messages from friends, colleagues, and family members who had watched the show. Most were supportive, telling him he'd done the right thing by walking away. A few were angry on his behalf, asking if he wanted them to say something publicly. But Clooney didn't need anyone to defend him. His work spoke for itself. The organizations he'd helped, the awareness he'd raised, the actual tangible good that had come from his activism. None of that could be erased by one bitter talk show host having a bad night. He pushed open the door to the parking lot where his car was waiting. The cool night air hit his face, a welcome relief after the heated studio atmosphere. His driver opened the door and Clooney slid into the back seat, finally able to relax. As the car pulled away from the studio, Clooney looked back at the building one last time. Somewhere inside, Bill Maher was probably already planning his next show, already thinking about what joke he'd make about this whole situation, already spinning the narrative to make himself look good. But it didn't matter, because everyone who watched that interview saw what really happened. They saw a man trying to have a serious conversation about serious issues get mocked and belittled by someone who cared more about being clever than being kind. They saw Bill Maher reveal exactly who he is when someone challenges him back, when someone doesn't just sit there and take his insults with a smile. They saw him get defensive, get mean, and ultimately kick off a guest rather than admit he might have been wrong. And they saw George Clooney refuse to play along, refuse to laugh off the insults, refuse to let someone trivialize work that actually matters. The car merged onto the highway, Los Angeles lights stretching out in every direction. Clooney closed his eyes, trying to let go of the anger and frustration from the past hour. Tomorrow there would be headlines. Tomorrow there would be think pieces and hot takes and probably a lot of arguments online. But tonight, he just wanted to go home. As the car drove through the city, taking Clooney away from the disaster of an interview and back to his life, one thing was certain. This wasn't going to be forgotten. This wasn't going to be just another viral moment that disappears in a day or two. This was the night Bill Maher showed everyone exactly what happens when his whole shtick, his whole confrontational, I'm smarter than you persona, runs up against someone who won't back down, someone who will call him out for what he really is, a bully with a platform. And in the end, it wasn't George Clooney who looked bad walking off that stage. It was Bill Maher, standing alone in his studio, having burned a bridge with one of Hollywood's most respected actors, all because he couldn't resist the urge to be the smartest, snarkiest guy in the room. The interview was over. Clooney was gone. And Bill Maher was left to deal with the consequences of letting his ego write checks his talent couldn't cash. That's what happens when you forget that behind every celebrity, behind every activist, behind every person trying to make a difference, there's a human being who deserves basic respect. Bill Maher forgot that last night, and George Clooney made damn sure everyone knew it before he walked out that door.